Chair Mayron, you can go ahead and start. We are live.
Thank you very much. I am actually going to stand for a moment to show you what I'm going to do to call this meeting to order, but I don't know if you all can see this. So I'm hitting my brick here, and this is a brick from the Memorial Arch from the Gateway Project. And it says on the brick, "May this link to our past be a gift for our future." So for that reason, I still have this from my days when I was UMAA president, and I thought it would be an appropriate use of my gaveling this meeting to order today, the Governance Committee. So at this time, I call to order the September 20 meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom in the Twin Cities campus. Most of us are connected virtually today, but some will be participating from our boardroom. So in this hybrid format, our protocol is much the same as our previous electronic meetings. I'm going to give you a few reminders in this regard. First, we will continue to keep everyone muted to reduce background noise. Second, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, use the raise hand feature within Zoom. Staff will keep a speakers list for me. Third, when I call on you, please unmute yourself. And fourth, although we do not have any action items on the agenda today, if needed, all votes will be recorded by roll call as required by the open meeting law. And finally, I would remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed and it will be archived on our website for later viewing. With that, at this time, I would like to turn to the agenda. You all know we have 4 agenda items. The first item on the agenda is the 2020-21 committee work plan. And Mr. Steves, if you could walk us through it at this time.
Chair Mayron and members of the committee, the work plan this year is focused on 3 major areas: policy revisions, discussion of governance best practices, and exploration of a board assessment. With regard to the policy revisions, the work is largely built around policies that are up for comprehensive review this year, and I'll just note a few of them. The first is namings, and this one in particular is coming forward, or we anticipate coming forward, to address the addition of language around renaming of buildings. Another policy we anticipate is the American Indian Advisory Board's policy, where amendments are currently being drafted to clarify current policy and ensure that boards are established across the system. Based on consultation, currently we anticipate that policy to come sometime in the second half of the year. And then the third one that I'll mention is alcoholic beverages on campus. There is interest within the university to potentially amend that policy and focus on some of the marketing provisions. And again, based on consultation and timing, we anticipate that that policy would come forward in the second half of the year. There are other policies that are noted in the work plan, and you'll see that those are also undergoing comprehensive review. And as those reviews are completed, you'll either see a report back that no recommendations are being proposed, or you'll see red line language come forward for committee consideration. We're not yet aware of changes being contemplated in some of the other policies that are listed in your work plan. With that, I'll just mention as well that the governance best practice topics may shift or adjust throughout the year because we'll have policy work drive most of the agendas, and we'll fit in governance best practice topics as we have room on agendas to do that. And we would certainly welcome the committee's input in terms of topics that you might find interesting or topics that would be helpful to you in your role as regents. So we welcome that input either today or subsequent. And then finally, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about options for board assessment, potential structures for that kind of work to happen, and we'll look at and we'll assess the committee's interest in proceeding with something of that nature. So that's how the committee work plan has been built out, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Ms. Dirksen, have you identified any individuals who wish to speak?
Madam Chair, I haven't, no.
All right, then we will, hearing no discussion on the work plan, we will then move to the next item on our agenda, which is the Board of Regents Policy Protection of Individual Health Information. This is up for review. And at this time, I would invite Senior Associate General Counsel Kaylee Clencia and Director Lori Catola to provide an overview of the proposed amendments. If you would like to proceed at this time.
Thank you, Chair Maron, Vice Chair Shu, and members of the Board of Regents. I would like to take 2 minutes to provide some context for the changes that we're proposing to the policy and to describe a bit of the background on this particular policy. The Board of Regents policy on protection of individual health information was first approved in 2003, shortly after the HIPAA privacy regulations were issued. The Board of Regents policy was then amended in 2009, but has not otherwise been changed since that time. There are a number of administrative policies that are connected to this Board of Regents policy, most notably the Protected Health Information, or PHI policy, which focuses on the requirements of the HIPAA privacy regulations on the university, and a number of information technology policies, which focus on information security requirements for a broad range of regulations, including the HIPAA security regulations. Both the PHI policy and the information technology policies have been updated a number of times since 2009, which again was the last time the Board of Regents policy was updated. When the Board of Regents policy came up for review this year, we realized that some of the language in the policy was no longer as well aligned with the language currently used in some of the related administrative policies, such as the PHI policy and the information technology policies. We also realized that since the Board of Regents policy included language that described very specific scenarios where the policy applied, the policy could be interpreted in a way that would exclude other scenarios that are not described. The Office of General Counsel and my office agreed that modifying the language in the Board of Regents policy to align more closely with the language in the administrative policies would be appropriate. We also eliminated the language that described the specific scenarios where the policy applied and revised the Board of Regents policy so it applies to anyone at the university who handles or has access to individual health information. This helps to ensure that we are focused on protection of individually identifiable health information across the university in all possible scenarios. It is not our intent to change the substance of the Board of Regents policy with these suggested changes, but rather to ensure that the Board of Regents policy extends across all scenarios where university members may have access to or handle individually identifiable health information, and to align the policy more closely with the language in more recently updated administrative policies. If there are any questions about the proposed changes, my colleague Kaylee Klinica from the Office of General Counsel and I are happy to address those.
Thank you very much, Associate General Counsel Kanika, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name when I talked about presenters. Do you have any further comments you would like to make before I open this matter for discussion?
No, though I am happy to answer questions.
All right. Then at this time, any discussion or questions by any of my fellow board members? Ms. Dirksen, are there any hands raised?
No, Madam Chair, I don't see any.
All right. This matter is currently up for review, and so if there is no further discussion, it will be on our agenda then for action in October. Is that correct, Ms. Dirksen?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Then hearing no discussion, we will now move to the next item on the agenda. Our next item is an opportunity for the board to provide input into the criteria used for the regent selection process. Mr. Steves will walk us through the criteria used during the past election cycle, and then we will have an opportunity to provide our input. Mr. Steves, if you could proceed.
Thank you, Chair Mayron and members of the committee. This is a unique opportunity that the board has to offer input into a process that, as you know, is unique in Minnesota, where the legislature has set up a screening process and then an election via the legislature for members of this board. And I'll just mention that in statute, the Regent Candidate Advisory Council is required to solicit input from the Board of Regents on selection criteria to be used in the upcoming election. So the next election will be in 2021 in the spring. And also input on the duties and responsibilities of being a member of the Board of Regents. And included in your docket are criteria that the council used in 2019, the last election cycle. And today's conversation really should use those as a jumping off point, because those criteria would be the most recent that were used by the council, and they would probably start from that draft and make edits and revisions from that document. With regard to the duties and responsibilities of being a regent, the council has often relied on board policy, in particular the policy that used to exist called Responsibilities of the Board and Individual Regents. That policy has now been folded into your new Code of Conduct for members of the Board of Regents. And that code speaks to things such as fiduciary duties, conflicts of interest, and other related topics. But if regents wish to offer additional comments on duties and responsibilities, I'm sure the council would appreciate that. As well, I think they also appreciate some sense, because they often share this with candidates, some sense of the time commitment or the other duties or time that you spend on board work. And so they like to try and give candidates a flavor for what it is that they're applying for. And a video and, if desired, a transcript of today's meeting will be shared with the council as they begin their work. So all of this input is being captured verbatim. We won't try to summarize or paraphrase anything that you're providing as input. All of this input will be shared with the council so that they have it as they begin their work for the next regent election cycle.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. So with that, I would like to open up the discussion and gain input. And I think what we're talking about is really two items that Mr. Steves talked about, and then I'd like to add into the mix one other one. So clearly about the criteria for selection of the regents, for your comment on that, any changes, additions, thoughts, anything you would like to say about the duties and responsibilities of a regent. And also, my understanding is that in past years, you have provided, or the board has provided, information on the types of experience that they would like to see regents bring to the table, or special skill sets that they might bring to the table, to make sure that we have a broad and diverse background to drive the conduct of the Board of Regents and ultimately serve the University of Minnesota. So if there are any particular experiences or skill sets that you think they should be looking out for or focusing on, I think that would be helpful for you to share with the advisory committee as well. So with that, I'm interested to see what you all have to say, and let me turn over to Sarah and ask, do we have any regents who have raised their hand and would like to provide input at this time?
Madam Chair, I don't have anybody on the speakers list for you. Give us just a moment, if you could, please. Let's just hold a moment, though. We're just taking a scan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Regent Powell's asked to speak, Madam Chair.
All All right, Regent Powell, why don't you go ahead and then I'll look back to you, Sarah, to see if who else is on the list. Thank you, Regent Powell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chair Mayron. First, I just want to seek a clarification. Mr. Steves commented that the candidates are also, they receive a copy of the, is it, Mr. Steves, is it our code of conduct? I just want to make sure.
Madam Chair and Regent Powell, yes, we would provide to them the Board of Regents policy on code of conduct for members of the board, in part because it speaks to some of the duties and responsibilities, but also because it talks about conflicts of interest, which has been something that the Advisory Council has in the past sought guidance on.
Okay, well, okay, that's what I thought I heard you say, and I just wanted to sort of affirm or offer my point of view that that is a very important document and really should be, Exhibit A for anyone considering becoming a regent. I think that, a lot of the board and the governance committee put a lot of good work into updating and revising that code of conduct. So I think that is, we should underline the importance of reading and understanding that material. And then I would just offer that I think that the current selection criteria, which I believe was updated a few years ago, in my view, it's very thorough. I mean, these are very good points, and I agree with them. And the last comment I would offer is, Chair Mayron, you underscored the time commitment, and so people considering serving on this board do need to understand the number of meetings, that these are 2-day, nearly full-day meetings with a lot of preparation, so that it is a very, very significant time commitment, and everyone needs to have their eyes open on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Powell. Sarah, other individuals who would like to speak?
Madam Chair, we have Regent Swigum, then Regent Beeson, then Regent Davenport, and Regent Macmillan.
All right. Regent Swigum.
Madam Chair, thank you. Members, I think we step on somewhat thin ice when we as regents decide who will be a good regent or not. I think it's fairly thin ice that we step on, and we need to do it cautiously. And I think the criteria, Madam Chair, that is listed before us on page 11 and 12, or is it 7 and 8, are I guess it's 7 and 8, are very, very good. I might just add one thing, Madam Chair, and that's approaching our service to the university in the state of Minnesota as a team. The 12 of us as regents as a team, and I've always liked team sports, but I think important in that is one, to recognize and respect that there's differences of thought and differences of value and differences of where we think maybe good decisions might lie for the best interests of the University of Minnesota. But recognize and respect those differences. And then after that, hope and work together for each other's success and the university's success, the success of the university. So I think that team aspect, that team type of perception would be good for our criteria to be enhanced.
Thank you very much, Regent Swigum. Any further comments before I move on to Regent Beeson?
No, not from me, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues. I do agree with Chair Powell that the comprehensive code of conduct policy that we worked on and passed is really an important document for both members of the RCAC and candidates to see. It's all there in one package, and it is a comprehensive look at how we deal with conflicts of interest and how we operate ethically and so on. I also agree with Regent Swigum. It's not up to this board to describe to the RCAC what types of backgrounds that candidates should have, or sort of going beyond what these, and I do like these criteria are aspirational, sort of behavioral criteria, but beyond that, we can't sort of go to, you know, what people's backgrounds are, and that composition of the board needs to be what the legislature looks at, and the RCAC, I guess, is part of that that process. I would suggest sort of beyond what we have here, I think it would be helpful for candidates and RCAC members to really view the work of the regents now that it's all recorded. I think they'd be surprised, and favorably or not, but they'd be surprised and they'd learn about how we do our business, the quality of the work, and I think it should be sort of, I think it should be required reading and viewing for everybody, and it's all there to see, and the RCAC members should as well, because we are I think it's a surprise for almost every new regent that joins the board, unless they've been involved with the university. Even there, it's a surprise. But I would like to see that sort of done informally. But after that, I think this is a good list of criteria. It is aspirational, but I think it captures what the requirements of the job are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regent Beeson. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The points I was going to make have been made by my colleagues. I might just reemphasize Regent Swigham's comments about teamwork, and also note that duties really extend beyond fiduciary to leadership and service, and just want to emphasize that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Regent Macmillan.
Thank you, Chair Maron. Regent Powell captured my input, I think, almost perfectly, and that is just we don't need to reinvent the wheel. You and your committee led a great amount of work and tremendous input from the full board on the code, and I think that needs to be highlighted. And I mean, we could spend some time talking about, you know, what kind of professional background we could use. I just haven't, in my time on the board, found that to be particularly, I don't know how the legislature views it, but would we need a doctor? Sure, that'd be great, but I think they can step back and look at that and decide for themselves. So I would highlight the code and use the document that's in place there to give that guidance without further edit, because that one's been through the ringer a whole pile of times in my tenure, and I don't know that we can really improve on it. So, but the code of conduct was well done, and that really needs to be front and center. Enough said. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Macmillan. Sarah, who else do we have on the list to provide input?
We have Regents Rocha and Herr.
Thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In our growth as a team, I will agree with the people that have spoken already on the main point. I think that the document that we currently have is comprehensive. I think it's good. Anything that would go beyond the description in there, I think, starts to get to our individual policy preferences for, you know, our personal view of how the board best operates. And I think that I would agree with Regent Sviggum on that point, that that is really up to the legislature as to how they would like to see this board function and, you know, going forward. I would also agree with those that have pushed back on the idea of identifying specific backgrounds or specific professions and so on for being on the board. My philosophy on that is that you know, we don't want to bring somebody in for a specific expertise that then gets them into the business of the people we hire with that expertise in the administration. That it's really about having judgment to evaluate what our experts are bringing to us, and not supplanting their expertise with our own personal views. So, you know, I recognize that that can be a challenge for different departments if you do have people in the leadership position, like on the board. So I like the very general approach that we have right now, and I think it's sound, and appreciate the chair and her committee's work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Herr?
It's muted.
Regent Herr, we're not able to hear you.
Sorry.
There
Sorry.
you go.
I
All right.
muted the computer and the phone. Yes, the criteria in and of themselves, the selection criteria, I don't have issues with them per se. My concern is more overarching in that I hope it doesn't deter, that it's not a deterrent versus aspirational. For myself, looking at, even when I was going through the process, looking at the 16 criteria, the question of, should I even apply? What am I going to focus on? What is important? Is it ranked by what's most important? And is 16 and 15 of lesser consideration, or are they all equal? And as a candidate, do I focus on all 16 of them, or is there one point that is more important than another? And so my concern is that looking at all of this, and it is very aspirational, that it actually deters candidates that have all of these, in fact, but might feel that they can't live up to these expectations. I myself certainly feel like sometimes I don't live up to all these 16 expectations. And so I don't know if it's too many for that is weeding out potentially great candidates, or a segment of the population that we might want to reach. And so those are some of my concerns, and I just wanted to state that publicly, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Any further comments by any of the other regents, either in response to each other or other ideas that you may have developed as you've been listening to each other?
Madam Chair, Regent Kenyana would like to be recognized.
Thank you. Regent Kenyana?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I overall agree with most of the comments. I think the criteria and the process is great as it is. I mean, if you look at the results of the last round, clearly it worked pretty well. But no, I will echo that the code of conduct is really, what should be front and center, as has been said, and that we shouldn't get into selecting professions, as others said. Although I do wish we had a second mortician on the board. But my main point of feedback is this: time. If we could stress to the candidates more than we do the time commitment, and I know you can capture, you can show them the calendar with the schedule of the meetings, but that doesn't fully capture it. And that's not to be put as a deterrent, but just to make sure that people really understand the commitment in terms of time and effort as they are stepping up to the plate. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just add, as I'm listening to people, that and picking up on what Regent Kenyana just said about the time commitment, I don't think anybody needs to come on this board with the aspiration necessarily to become take a leadership position at some point during their board tenure. But given how small this board is and how many committees we have and the various responsibilities that we are called upon, I think that it would be important for the committee to at least get a sense of whether the individuals they are considering would be willing to take on leadership positions within the board during their tenure. because as I said, the size itself of the board, I think, mandates that requirement on each and every one of us. And it, of course, then affects the time commitment as well when you take on those positions. So I put that out there in addition to talking about the time commitment. Any further comments, reactions, discussions, thoughts? Sarah, do we have any other individuals who would like to speak in this regard?
We do not.
All right, let me just ask, President Gable, you've been here a year. Is there anything you would like to say in terms of, and I realize we're all your boss, so, but that you may want to add in terms of what you think of as appropriate criteria for those who are given the responsibility of the trust of this University of Minnesota?
Thank you, Regent Mayron. I would start by saying that I'm grateful that people are willing to do it, that it's a tremendously important role, that it's the backbone of what it means to be a public institution, particularly one like ours that's both the flagship system and the land grant with a deep mission that requires the oversight appropriately represented from around the state. But that otherwise I would defer to the comments of the sitting regents around the documents that have been prepared and understanding of the process and of the expectations, particularly the time. We do, as the administration, ask a lot of board members in terms of time. And we think with good results, if I can steal from what Regent Beeson said earlier and other people affirmed, but that's, it is what it takes in order to achieve those results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Gable. Sarah, any other individuals wish to speak to this topic?
Madam Chair, there aren't any.
All right, then with that, we will move to the last item on the agenda, which are the information items. And at this time, I will turn this back over to Mr. Steves. Is there anything that you would like to highlight for us with respect to information items?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I'll just remind folks that the way comprehensive reviews work is that when a policy undergoes a comprehensive review, and that happens at least once every 6 years, it either comes forward with recommended changes or there are no changes being recommended. And when that happens, what the practice that we've adopted is that it's reported back to the committee as an information item. It appears in your docket so that you can understand that the comprehensive review has been completed, and you have an opportunity for the committee to say, actually, we would like to take up some changes, or we would like you to look at certain changes to that policy. And so I'll just note that in your docket for the Governance and Policy Committee, there are 2 policies that have completed comprehensive review and have no changes recommended at this time. Those policies are awards, honors, and recognition, and student representatives to the Board of Regents. Both of these policies underwent fairly significant changes in the past 4 or 5 years. And so therefore they're up to date, and at this point, no additional changes are being recommended. Links to both of the policies are included in your docket.
Thank you. Any discussion or comments by board members at this time on the information items?
Regent Mayron, Regent Kenyana has his hand raised.
All right. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My comment is regarding the policy student representatives to the Board of Regents, and I have the policy pulled up. I'm not sure if my comment is just a procedural thing that we've chosen to do or if it's codified in policy. But I want to have some discussion on whether or not we could have student representatives participate at the full board meeting. I certainly understand why we don't have them at governance, as it's internal governance for our board and litigation and such. But the full board appears to be where we have a lot of our meaty discussions and where we complete the discussions that happened in the committees. So it's always struck me as a bit odd that we don't invite the student representatives to participate in that conversation. So I'd just like to hear feedback from my colleagues, and then also clarification from Mr. Steves if that would be a policy change or just a practice change.
Thank you very much, Regent Kenyana. Let's go first to Mr. Steves and answer that last question first, and then open it for discussion to get a reaction to what Regent Kenyana is suggesting he thinks would be a better policy going forward. Mr. Steves?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, you're correct, Regent Kenyana, that the longstanding practice has been that the student representatives sit with the committees and deliberate and offer perspectives during those conversations. They are non-voting, as you know, and then are not sitting with the board when the board is convened as a full board. I will note, however, that there are two other mechanisms that are not available in the committee venue that are available in the board venue that are built into the policy, and that is that annually the student representatives present a comprehensive report to the board. Usually that happens in March, and that occurs at the full board. And the other thing that I'll note is, and I can't quickly find the reference, but student representatives are permitted to request an opportunity to speak to any agenda item, and at least in my tenure, that has always been honored. So if student representatives wished to speak to a particular item on a board agenda, they would make that request, and then the chair would determine whether or not that was honored. But as I've said, that has been honored in the past, and student representatives would be able to come to the table and speak to a particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. Let me just ask a clarifying question, or maybe a background question. Mr. Steves, or perhaps others who have been on the board for some time, has this issue come up in the past, been raised and considered by previous boards about the pros and cons of adding student representatives to the board meeting?
Madam Chair, I'm not aware of this coming up in the past as being a request or something of interest. I will just note that at least among peers, the student representatives to the Board of Regents program is far and away the most involvement that students have in board deliberations. And I've consulted with many institutions around the country, and I believe, certainly across the Big Ten, and many of them are quite surprised at the level of engagement and involvement that we have with our students. And so I think, certainly we can always look at additional opportunities for students to participate and be involved, but I would just say that we have what I would consider to be a model program at this point.
Thank you. Ms. Dirksen, are there any regents who have indicated a desire to speak on this?
Regents Rocha and Beeson.
All right, thank you. Regent Rocha?
Thank you, Chair Miron. This brings up a point that I think both Regent Kenyana and I would agree that one of the criteria we should add for regent selection is former service as a student representative. As we are part of that distinguished fraternity of public servants. So it's a good question, and to go to the chair specific point, I'm not aware that and actually Regent Beeson can give, I think, some clarity during the period before I was elected to the board in 2015 again, but. As a student rep, the way the structure was set up was for representation on the committees. At that time, there were 4 standing committees, and then you had additional committees that met less frequently, and there was always student representation in that setting. And then when the board met in a committee of the whole, it covered a lot of, covered all the topics, some of the topics that we now will cover in our board meeting specifically. So really all matters of, that required kind of the deliberation and so on, they were happening with the chair of the student reps representing the student representatives on the committee of the whole, and then the standing committees would have 2 student reps from the various campuses and graduate and professional students. And so the board meeting itself tended to be more of a formality just to ratify all the things that had happened at the standing committees and at the committee of the whole. Things are a little bit different now with the 3 larger committees of the whole and then audit litigation. And so we do have some topics of substance that come specifically before the board where there wouldn't have been a conversation at a committee of the whole with a student representation element. And so, and to that, I think I would refer to what Mr. Steves just said, I guess on 2 points. One is you hold a very unique position as the student regent, as it's commonly called, the at-large position with a student requirement is, through my experience back then and since, other institutions will have like a 1-year student. Sometimes it's non-voting. We have both the position that you hold as well as student representatives from across the campus. So as Mr. Steves points out, it is extensive compared to virtually any other institution I'm aware of. But I would say that the second part would simply be then to be very mindful of the fact that if a matter comes before the board meeting itself solely, that if students have a concern or question or want some sort of input, that they would be provided that. I know as an individual member of the board, if I were ever contacted by the student representatives or student government generally, and that they wanted to have some input, I would be willing to ask the chair to provide them an opportunity to speak at that particular meeting. Otherwise we're kind of talking about in the abstract, without a specific issue where someone says, well, we wanted to have input on that and we weren't allowed to. I don't think that that's been the case. And if that ever did arise, then maybe I would revisit it. But otherwise, I think that our current structure provides a tremendous amount of input. And I would always welcome more input from the student representatives, as you and I have talked about, to make sure that we have that sense. So that's a little bit of the history from my 32 years since my first election as a student representative. And of course, there are gaps in there where I wasn't particularly aware of what was going on, but I think it's a good process. I think you raise a very good question because of the changes in the format over those years. But as it currently lies, I think it's pretty strong.
All right, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Regent Rocha. I agree with your comments. Going back to Regent the Executive Director Steve's, this is my thing too, that this is probably the most comprehensive set of involvements from students that we have in the Big Ten. I would disagree with Regent Kenyana that the quote, the action is at the board level. I think it's really at the committee level. And now that we're operating committees as committees of the whole, where everybody's there, this is where really the issues get vetted and get formed and amendments happen. By the time they get to the board, I think, as you know, they're really ready for a vote. The input is done. So I think having it at the committee level is critical. I can't overstate the value of the student representatives, particularly the work that they do on these projects over the years. It has been really consequential. So, they take what they hear at the board, what they've read, what they're hearing from their constituencies, and then focusing on their own it's really their own committee work. That's the most important part. I mean, I appreciate the input they provide at the meetings, but this other work that they do during the year is so important. And I want to recognize that. And then third, the board meeting is really the business meeting. It's the formal meeting. We are the ones elected by the legislature. We have to be, we're making the decisions at the end of the day, and they show up on Fridays at the board meetings. I think we do need to just be gathered ourselves for that kind of activity. Thanks for raising the question.
Thank you. Let me just share a couple comments as I'm listening, and then I would like to loop back to you, Regent Kenyana, to get your reaction to the comments that have been made. And I will say I don't know where I fall on this issue. I think it's an important issue that you have raised. And I think one of the things that you're raising is, while it is true that there are a variety of means by which the students can share their viewpoints at a board meeting, either through the report or by being asked to be recognized or emailing us, I think what you're suggesting, if we were to look into this, is that we formalize their input and give them an opportunity at the board meeting to speak on any particular issue. And so I asked myself, is there any harm that would come in formalizing that input as opposed to the way it currently comes to us in a more ad hoc way? And I will say, I don't know where I land on these things yet. I'm just raising these issues. Second, Regent Beeson, I probably would take issue with you that what happens at the board meeting, it's true, much of the work takes place at the committee level, and to the extent we take action at the committee level, we do act on it at the board. But I think, for example, today's agenda is a perfect example where we have a significant issue coming before us with respect to athletics that has not percolated up through a committee, but is coming directly to the board. And obviously, it's an issue for which students have a lot of opinions on, I am sure, and we're already starting to hear them. So I don't think it's fair to say that the board meeting really, it's true, much of the meat of what we do occurs at the committee, but there are meaty issues that arise at the board level as well. So I put that out there. And the third piece is the interesting piece about the student regent. And it is true, on the one hand, we could say that students have their representation through the student regent, but I am of the view that while each of us, with the exception of the at-large candidates, the rest of us who were elected to represent, in some sense, for a particular district, once we are on the board, we are no longer, I don't think, representing our constituency from which we were come out of. Me, the 5th district, or for Regent Kenyana, even though he is the student regent, once we're on the board, our duty is to the university as a whole and to no particular constituency. So I do think that there's a difference between having student input at a board meeting where they would be called on to speak. Obviously, they are not voting. There's a difference between that and the expectation that falls on a student regent or any of us. I think the expectation is for what's in the best interest of the university and not necessarily what's in the best interest of our of our particular constituency from which we came. So I'm kind of on the one hand, on the other hand, I'm not sure exactly where I land on this, but I would be interested, in light of those comments and the comments by others, if there's any other further input that Regents would like to share on this issue of whether students should have input. In other words, be able to formalize their input at a board meeting. And with that, why don't I loop back at this time to Regent Kenyana?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Regent Rocha, Regent Beeson. I appreciate the conversation. And I will agree with Mr. Steves that, our program is robust and inclusive. I certainly didn't bring it up, as a complaint or lack of that, but really did want to spur the discussion. And Regent Beeson, you are correct that a lot of the work does happen in committee, but to the chair's point, there are certain things that come up here. And I've just found it helpful to be able to look to the 1 or 2 students who are representing the entire student population and just ask of their opinion on it. Again, the opportunity is there, and Mr. Steves clarified that if they do want to speak on the issue, they can. But we also haven't. I don't know that there's a history of student representatives trying to commandeer a meeting or anything like that. They raise their hand, they're recognized, they give their input, and we move on. So I don't know that we would lose much from including it there. But it seems that the discussion is good, and I think going forward, the student representatives who I imagine are listening can continue to have the conversation with Mr. Steves or Mr. Langworthy on it. But yeah, I mean, I'm satisfied with the conversation. I think while we're leaders in our inclusiveness, amongst our peers, I think there's an opportunity to increase that. But I won't speak for them. I just wanted to spur the conversation. And I will add to Regent Rocha's point that President Emeritus Kaler was also a student representative at one time, and our annual reunion of the fraternity is a bit overdue. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Regent Kenyana. Ms. Dirksen, any other comments that Regents wish to share?
Madam Chair, Regent Rocha would like to be recognized.
All right, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think we will then bring the discussion to a close unless I hear from anyone else.
Thank you. Yeah, just to join the chair in her comments. You're absolutely right. The at-large position that has a student requirement at the time of election is. I think you characterized it very well. That at that point, that position becomes a rather than a parochial position for student advocacy, it becomes a position for the university as a whole. The big advantage, of course, is you're talking about somebody that is very fresh, either currently on campus or very recently on campus, and so there's that kind of natural representation component. And a former student representative, Mike Unger, was a big part of getting that position put in place back in the 70s. It's a wonderful history. But even then, the student representatives, that was one of the challenges for student representatives is how parochial is your interest versus in the best interest of the university as a whole. But I just want to make very clear that I'm not trying to box Regent Kenyana or anyone that's held that position into being a parochial advocate, but ultimately it does provide our students with a perspective on our board that is fairly recent. And I would then finish with saying that Regent Kenyana has identified an issue, and the chair in her discussion of today's agenda has identified a difference from in the past, where because the committee of the whole, back when it was called the committee of the whole, would have considered the topics that some of which make it to the board meeting now. And so I just think as Regent Kenyana, I think wisely cautions us that we should be very mindful of the fact that if something is exclusively at the board meeting and we don't have that student representative seated at that meeting, we need to make sure that there is that kind of input opportunity, particularly if we become aware that it's desired. The challenge with that, of course, Regent Kenyana, is the conversation may turn in a way that creates a desire for student representation at the meeting, and they wouldn't necessarily know that in advance. So we need to be in close contact with that constituency to make sure that representation is there. But good conversation and a very good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Ms. Dirksen, any other hands up?
Regent Beeson.
Yes, thank you. Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging me. The conversation reminds me that from time to time the faculty have sought a seat on the Board of Regents, and they are the other great stakeholder in this, in addition to the students. I heard an idea a while ago, and I'll leave it to your wisdom, Madam Chair, to think about, take this thought, but is actually reducing the number of student representatives on the board and adding faculty representatives, so we have a balance of both of the primary constituencies and an advisory capacity for the board. And I don't know what to do with that idea. I'll be so long gone. We sort of look at this, but we do have to think about the faculty and the role that they play here in addition to the students. Both students and the faculty have their own formal groups, and we do get the input that way, but I'll just leave that idea for you and the colleagues to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regent Beeson. Any further comments, Ms. Dirksen?
There aren't any.
Further individuals. All right, well, I think that was an excellent discussion. I thank you, Regent Kenyana, for bringing up this issue. I think we'll see how it percolates as the year proceeds, but I think you've raised a very important issue, and I appreciate that. At this time, then, there being no additional business before the committee, I will hold up my brick, hit the gavel, and we are adjourned. Mr. Steves, when will
Madam
the
Chair?
meeting- Yes.
Before we all depart from the committee, Mr. Steves, I think we've noticed that the full board meeting will begin, whatever, after a break, after the conclusion of this meeting. So would it be appropriate to suggest that that the full board reconvene at 9:15, 15 minutes from now?
Mr. Chair and Madam Chair, yes.
Okay. Well, why
That
don't
was the
we?
issue I was going to raise as well.
Oh,
Or-
sorry, Chairman.
No. Yep.
So why don't we do that? Why don't we'll take a break. Looks like it's just about 9 o'clock right now, and the full board will reconvene at 9:15.
Thank you.